All right. Well, today for book by book, we're talking about numbers 30 through 32. And we have this week and next week in numbers, and then we're going to be wrapping up this book. And so today we're going to look at some vows, like how to handle vows and who can keep and make vows. And we're also going to talk about the preparing for the battle against the Midianites and the battle that actually happens. And then the dividing up of the spoils from the battle. And then finally, we're going to look at some of the tribes deciding to stay on the east side of the Jordan River and how they're going to work that out. And so these vows section that we're going to look at, it's kind of interesting why this is here. But I want to just point out something as we jump into this. Often vows were made in a preparation for battle. People would say, Lord, if you would help me win this battle, I will give you all of the spoils from the battle, or some kind of vow like that. Or Lord, I'm going to vow to abstain from something as long as the battle is going on, so that you would protect me. So it's a promise to the Lord. And so it makes sense why this vow section is happening here as the people of Israel are preparing for battle. But we'll talk a little bit about some of the different kinds of vows. And so let's just jump in. Verse 1. Moses said to the heads of the tribes of Israel, "This is what the Lord commands. When a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath to obligate himself by a pledge, he must not break his word, but must do everything he said. When a young woman still living in her father's household makes a vow to the Lord or obligates herself by a pledge, and her father hears about her vow or pledge, but says nothing to her, then all her vows and every pledge by which she obligated herself will stand. But if her father forbids her when he hears about it, none of her vows or the pledges by which she obligated herself will stand. The Lord will release her because her father has forbidden her. If she marries after she makes a vow, or after her lips utter a rash promise by which she obligates herself, and her husband hears about it, but says nothing to her, then her vow or the pledges by which she obligated herself will stand. But if her husband forbids her when he hears about it, he nullifies the vow that obligates her or the rash promise by which she obligates herself, and the Lord will release her. Any vow or obligation taken by a widow or a divorced woman will be binding on her. If a woman living with her husband makes a vow or obligates herself by a pledge under oath, and her husband hears about it but says nothing to her and does not forbid her, then all her vows or the pledges by which she obligated herself will stand. But if her husband nullifies them when he hears about them, then none of the vows or pledges that came from her lips will stand. Her husband has nullified them, and the Lord will release her. Her husband may confirm or nullify any vow she makes or any sworn pledge to deny herself. But if her husband says nothing to her about it from day to day, then he confirms all her vows or pledges binding on her. He confirms them by saying nothing to her when he hears about them. If, however, he nullifies them sometime after he hears about them, then he must bear the consequences of her wrongdoing. These are the regulations the Lord gave Moses concerning relationships between a man and his wife, and between a father and his young daughter still living at home. All right, so vows to the Lord run in a lot of different situations, but as I said when we were getting started, oftentimes in preparation for battle, men would make some kind of promise. There's a story in the book of Judges where I believe it's pronounced Japheth. I could be wrong on this, but he makes a vow saying, Lord, if you give me this victory over my enemies, whatever the first thing that comes out of my compound, I will give to you. And his daughter actually was the first person to come and greet him. And so he's like made a vow, and it was a rash vow, but it was a vow nonetheless. And the book of Judges has a lot of examples of things that we should never do. And so this is one of those times. But shortly after the book of Judges, there's a book, First Samuel, and Hannah, who's the wife of Elkanah, and Elkanah has two wives, and the first wife is able to conceive and has children, but Hannah is not. And so one time they're up at the tabernacle, and Hannah is praying, and she makes a vow to the Lord, saying, Lord, if you bless me with a child, I will give him back to you. And so that's a vow. And Elkanah does not negate the vow, and so her vow is binding. And so those are just a couple of examples in the Old Testament about how these vows might come about. So as the people of Israel are preparing to go and fight the Midianites, these laws are reminders to the people that if you make a vow as a man, you have to fulfill the vow. It is a binding pledge to the Lord. But where it gets a little tricky for our modern sensibilities is we have these examples of women who are not allowed to, who can make a vow, but they could have their vow nullified by either their father, if they're still living at home, or their husband. And part of this is because they are under the responsibility in their society of, if they're an unmarried woman living at home with their family, that woman, that young woman is a part of her father's household, and he is the ultimate authority of how to of the pledges to the Lord in their home. And so she has to respect him. And so if she were to make a vow and the father would be like, no way, that's not going to happen in this house, then he could nullify it. But if she got married, then she now is under her husband's authority. And so if the husband hears about the vow, then he can nullify it. And you may think this is like overly controlling or too highly patriarchal, but this is also the era of the time that they were living in. This was not outside of the norm, where the husband would have that kind of authority over the wife, a father having that kind of authority over an unmarried daughter. And so this was not like groundbreaking or controversial for them. But if the husband or father hears about the vow and is just like, okay, I'm not going to change anything, then that vow is binding. And even later, it says like if a young woman gets married and then her husband says later, after hearing about the vow, he lets some time go by, then he says, no, let's not do this vow. Then he has to fulfill the vow because he heard about it and he just let it go. That's not, God's like, no, that's not cool. You had an opportunity to act earlier. And so the big exception here is for divorced or widowed women. And in this situation, like that woman does not go back under the authority of her father. She is an independent person, and she's able to make her own decisions and make her own vows. And so she's able to, she doesn't have authority over somebody that could nullify her vow. And these vows are more often than not a sign of the devotion that the person taking the vow is making to the Lord. And so what does this look like for us today? It could be a vow to serve, and just to say, Lord, I'm going to give you my a week of my vacation to go and serve on a mission trip. That's a vow. Or it could be a vow to generosity, to say, Lord, I'm going to commit to you the tithe, or to give above the tithe, or those kinds of vows. And like we in our modern culture, we don't take vows as seriously as the ancient cultures. But I would urge us to not enter into a vow too quickly. That Jesus, when he calls his disciples, he tells the disciples to count the cost, because they are entering into a vow-like relationship with Jesus. And if you are not able to count the cost before you take the vow, then you might renege on the vow. And that is worse than not taking the vow at all in a honor shame based culture like the ancient Near East. And so it's better to just not do the vow than to say I will and then not do it. And so when we are thinking about some other vows, Paul talks about vows in 1 Corinthians. There's married couples who are taking a vow of abstinence of between husband and wife to not have sex for a period of time. And Paul says, don't let that go too long. Like, you are together. And so one person can't just say, I'm taking a vow of abstinence, and the other marriage partner be like, wait a minute, I wasn't a part of that. We didn't agree on this. And so Paul is urging unity in the household, to make sure that they are not just avoiding each other, but they're taking this vow of abstinence to devote themselves to prayer. And so any type of vow that we take with the Lord, whether it is I will abstain from something or I promise to do something for the Lord's glory, it is something that we should do prayerfully and focus our devotion on the Lord during that time of the vow. Another vow that is going to come up in the life of Samuel, even in the Judges, is the Nazirite vow. And the Nazirite vow, anybody could take the Nazirite vow. We talked about it a couple weeks ago. And men or women could choose to be a Nazirite, but they would have to set time limits and parameters on the length of the vow, and then they would have to fulfill that time. And even if you remember back when we read about that if something happened that broke the vow, they'd have to start over. And so, this is part of the process for the people. It's like it was a regular part of their life to commit themselves to the Lord through taking vows. So before they go into battle, people might be making vows, making promises. And so these sections of laws are given here to say, when you make these vows, these are what you need to be considering. So let's look at verse 31. And we're going to talk about basically violence, wide-scale violence against the Midianites here. And so again, this is not something that our normal is common, and it's hard to preach on passages like this, but it is something that the Lord called the people to do, to drive out the enemies of God. It is not something that we are called to do today, because the church is not a nation. And so that's not something that the church should be like, yeah, we need to kill people. We don't. That's not our job. So let's look at verse 31. The Lord said to Moses, take vengeance on the Midianites for the Israelites. After that, you will be gathered to your people. So right away, this is something that the Lord is saying, like, the clock is ticking, Moses. You're going to die soon. You'll be gathered to your people. So Moses said to the people, arm some of your men and go to war against the Midianites, so that they may carry out the Lord's vengeance on them. Send into battle 1,000 men from each of the tribes of Israel. So 12,000 men armed for battle, 1,000 from each tribe, were supplied from the clans of Israel. Moses sent them into a battle, 1,000 from each tribe, along with Phinehas and Eleazar, the priest, who took with him articles from the sanctuary and the trumpets for signaling. They fought against Midian, as the Lord commanded Moses, and killed every man. Among their victims were Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. They also killed Balaam, son of Beor, with the sword. The Israelites captured the Midianite women and children and took all the Midianite herds, flocks, and goods as plunder. They burned all the towns where the Midianites had settled, as well as their camps. They took all the plunder and spoil, including the people and animals, and brought the captives, spoil, and plunder to Moses and Eleazar, the priest, from the Israelite assembly at their camp on the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. All right, so the Midianites are a confederation of tribes, not unlike Israel. There was no one place that was Midian. They were kind of spread out. There were some that were more nomadic than others, but there were some towns and villages and camps. All right, and so the Midianites are not going to just be gone now from the narrative of Scripture. They're going to come back, but these Midianites that are here, the Israelites are going to attack them and go to war with them. And so the people of Israel send out 12,000 fighting men, one from every tribe, except for the Levites, because they're not allowed to be a part of the army. And they bring the articles of the sanctuary, which is most likely the Ark of the Covenant, as a reminder to the people that the Lord is with them. So they're not bringing an idol. They're bringing really the footstool of the Ark of the Covenant, the footstool of God as the represented in the Ark of the Covenant. So they're bringing all that out to fight against the enemies of God. And we see that they kill all the grown men, and but they do take some plunder. And taking plunder was common in the ancient world. And if they were fighting, then they would be given a portion of the plunder from the battle. That was how many soldiers were paid for thousands of years. And they wiped out at least 5 cities where these kings would have been. But the text here, the passage, is highlighting that they didn't kill everybody. They didn't kill all the women and children. And this is going to be a concern for Moses. And so that's where it comes in on verse 13. Moses, Eleazar the priest, and all the leaders of the community went to meet them outside the camp. Moses was angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, who returned from the battle. Have you allowed all the women to live? He asked. They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and enticed the Israelites to be unfaithful to the Lord in the Peor incident, so that a plague struck the Lord's people. Now kill all the boys and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. Anyone who has killed someone or touched someone who has killed must stay outside the camp 7 days. On the third and 7th days, you must purify yourselves and your captives. Purify every garment as well as everything made of leather, goat hair, or wood. Then Eleazar the priest said to the soldiers who had gone into battle, "This is what is required by the law that the Lord gave Moses: gold, silver, bronze, iron, tin, lead, and anything else that can withstand fire must be put through the fire, and then it will be clean, but it must also be purified with water of cleansing. And whatever cannot withstand fire must be put through that water. On the 7th day, wash your clothes, and you will be clean. Then you may come into the camp." Okay, so Moses goes out and he's like, why didn't you kill everybody? Which, like, we read this and we're like, whoa, Moses, this is really harsh. But when you read his rationales, like, you saved all these women, but the women of Midian were the ones who tempted you, people of Israel, to worship Baal and the Midianite gods and to engage in sexual immorality, and you're bringing them into your camp. And so Moses is like, you cannot do this. This will only lead to greater heartbreak later. And so while it is harsh to read this and hard to really accept in our day, but Moses is trying to protect the purity of the people, that they would not veer into worshiping false gods and idolatry. And so they kill every woman who has known a man and every boy, because the boys would potentially someday grow up to be soldiers who might want to fight against the people of Israel. And so they're trying to eliminate the enemies of the people of God. But they're able to keep the young women who are virgins from execution, and they probably brought them into their families. They gave them in marriage to other people in the people of Israel. It is, in our modern sensibility, this is hard. Every time I read this is hard to read, but this was not uncommon for the ancient world. And so the preservation of life here of these Midianite virgin women is what is uncommon. This would not be something that you would expect that to save any of these women, but they do. But before they are able to become part of the people of God, everybody and everything that is taken in plunder needs to be purified, because anything that touches a dead body is impure. And so all of the soldiers and their plunder has to wait outside the camp and do the purification rituals, as if you touched a dead body. And so it's a week-long purification process. And so they do that for themselves and for all of their plunder. And and then as they go on here in this next section, they talk about how they're going to actually divide up the plunder. And that's what verse 25 is about here. Excuse me. The Lord said to Moses, "You and Eleazar, the priests, and the family heads of the community are to count all the people and animals that were captured. Divide the spoils equally between the soldiers who took part in the battle and the rest of the community. From the soldiers who fought in the battle, set apart as tribute for the Lord 1 out of every 500, whether people, cattle, donkeys, or sheep. Take this tribute from the half share and give it to Eleazar, the priest, as the Lord's part. From the Israelite half, select 1 out of every 50, whether people, cattle, donkeys, sheep, or other animals. Give them to the Levites, who are responsible for the care of the Lord's tabernacle." So Moses and Eleazar the priest did as the Lord commanded Moses. The plunder remaining from the spoils of the soldiers took was 675,000 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 women who had never slept with a man. The half share of those who fought in the battle was 337,500 sheep, which was the tribute for the Lord, was 675. 36,000 cattle, of which the tribute for the Lord was 72. 30,500 donkeys, of which the tribute for the Lord was 61. 16,000 people, of whom the tribute for the Lord was 32. Moses gave the tribute to Eleazar the priest as the Lord's part, as the Lord commanded Moses. The half beginning to the Israelites, which Moses set apart for that of the fighting men, the community's half, was 337,500 sheep, 36,000 cattle, 30,500 donkeys, and 16,000 people. From the Israelites' half, Moses selected 1 out of every 50 people and animals, and the Lord commanded him and gave them to the Levites, who were responsible for the care of the Lord's tabernacle. Then the officers who were over the unit of the army, the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, went to Moses and said to him, "Your servants have counted the soldiers under our command, and not one is missing. So we brought as an offering to the Lord the gold articles each of us acquired, armlets, bracelets, signet rings, earrings, and necklaces, to make atonement for ourselves before the Lord." Moses and Eleazar the priests accepted from them the gold, all the crafted articles, and Eleazar presented as a gift to the Lord, weighed 16,700 shekels. Each soldier had taken plunder for himself. Moses and Eleazar the priest accepted the gold from the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds and brought it to the tent of meeting as a memorial for the Israelites before the Lord. So this division of plunder is very orderly, and it's what we see here is the Eleazar, the chief priest, and his family, they receive a significant amount of sheep and cattle and donkeys and even people. And the people are these women, these virgin women who were probably brought in as to be helpers in slaves, maybe in the work around the temple, around the Levites' responsibility, but they were not going to marry these women from Midian because they're not allowed to. And so they probably had them helping with the different work of the temple and the things that the different tribes or different clans in the Levite tribe were supposed to do. Outside of the Levitical tribe, the women that were brought in, they could be married to sons in the different tribes. We see that happening. There is a conversion process that they could go through to become Jewish. Whether or not they did that, text doesn't say. It just says they're given them. But there's a significant amount of resources that comes to the priest's family, the high priest family, and then as well as the Levites. And when we think about all of the work that is done for the tabernacle, the sacrifices, all of this different stuff, they're giving a priest, or they're sacrificing the lamb morning and evening every day. And last week we looked at the different festivals that they're supposed to be sacrificing for. And the people are supposed to bring these, but the Levites also had some animals that they are able now to offer as part of the work of the ongoing work of the tabernacle. Because there's some sacrifices that the Levites and the priests had to do without the aid of the people. And so here we have one of the ways that kind of jumpstarts the process for them. But then what's really fascinating here is they divide up all the spoil with all the people, but then they also come to the decision to count for casualties, and they realize they didn't lose anybody. All the men who went out to battle came home, which it doesn't happen in war. That never happens. And so this is one more sign of the Lord's provision. And so then that's like they say, like, we counted and now we want to make an offering to purify ourselves, to make atonement for ourselves before the Lord. That's what verse 50 says. Now, what is that about? Well, they counted the army, and that's a census. And anytime they're supposed to do a census, they need to make atonement for counting themselves. And so the leaders of the army are saying, like, we did a census, we're going to make atonement, buy ourselves back essentially from the Lord, because he provided life for us in this military endeavor. And so they give above and beyond what is necessary for their atonement. And so it is I didn't get that. Sorry, my watch is talking to me. What we look at as the amount of gold that they eventually give as a atonement offering here, it's about 600 pounds of gold. And so all of the different jewelry that they captured in this war, they had 600 pounds that they gave to the Lord for the work of the tabernacle. And that could have been maintaining different elements that would have been gold and needed to be refurbished over the last 40 years. I don't know what they did with the gold at this point, but now the tabernacle had a lot of gold as well. And so as we look at passages like this, there's this kind of warfare in the Bible, and it's not comfortable. It's not easy to process, like, why would God want this? But the Midianites were the enemies of God's people. And even as we look at the coming weeks, when we are going to look at Joshua going into and the conquest of the land of Canaan, there is a impurity in the land of false worship, of idolatry, of pagan practices that the Lord wants to drive out. And the 400 years of occupation in Egypt, this impurity has grown and grown and grown. And for the people's sake, God is saying, like, I need you to eliminate them so that they will not be a problem for you later. And they are a nation that is just getting started, and they need to secure their territory. But again, the nation of Israel is not the church. And so for followers of Jesus, like, there's a difference here between nation building and Jesus's call to love your neighbors as you love yourself, right? We are not going to go out as a church and go to war with anybody. And so the individual follower of Jesus and the local church needs to learn and focus in not on, like, oh, we better take land from the Buddhist temple down the road. That's not our responsibility. Our responsibility now, love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And so there's a tension that I want to acknowledge as we read these Old Testament passages, and we're like, oof, this is not great. This does not sit well. I get it. But there is a distinction between our life now and the nation of Israel going into the land. And that distinction is okay to hold on to. So, all right, let's look at chapter 32. And I'm going to read a large section here because the people have been driving folks out of the eastern territories of the Jordan River. And so tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh are going to be like, this is pretty good right here. So what are we going to do? So chapter 32, verse 1. The Reubenites and Gadites, who had very large herds and flocks, saw that the lands of Jazer and Gilead were suitable for livestock. So they came to Moses and Eleazar the priest and to the leaders of the community and said, Ataroth, Dibon, Jazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, Elealeh, Sebem, Nebo, and Beon, the land the Lord subdued before the people of Israel, are suitable for livestock, and your servants have livestock. If we have found favor in your eyes, they said, let this land be given to your servants as our possession. Do not make us cross the Jordan. Moses said to the Gadites and Reubenites, should your fellow Israelites go to war while you sit here? Why do you discourage the Israelites from crossing over into the land the Lord has given them? This is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to look over the land. After they went up to the valley of Eshcol and viewed the land, they discouraged the Israelites from entering the land the Lord had given them. The Lord's anger was aroused that day, and he swore this oath, because they have not followed me wholeheartedly, not one of these people, not one of those who were 20 years older or more when they came out of Egypt will see the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not one except Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, and Joshua, son of Nun, for they followed the Lord wholeheartedly. The Lord's anger burned against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years until the whole generation of those who had done evil in his sight was gone. And here you are, a brood of sinners, standing in the place of your fathers and making the Lord even more angry with Israel. If you turn away from following him, he will again leave all this people in the wilderness, and you will be the cause of their destruction. So they come and say, look, we've got all these flocks, we've got all these herds. Now we just, after this battle, like we have all of these animals here, and this is good land, and we're ready to stay and make this our inheritance, which seems like a very reasonable thing now, but they have forgotten. It seems that they have forgotten what the Lord had done and why they have been wandering for the past 40 years. And so Moses is, understandably furious with their desire to stay in on the eastern side of the Jordan. And he's like, when we tried 40 years ago to come in, the people doubted, and now you're going to try to do this again, to not be willing to go into the land that God is sending us to. And so Moses is very frustrated, very angry with them, because Moses, Caleb, and Joshua are the only ones who were there, who were old enough to remember what had gone on. And so now he's like, he can't believe it's happening all over again. And so how do they respond? Verse 16. Then they came up to him and said, we would like to build pens here for our livestock and cities for our women and children, but we will arm ourselves for battle and go ahead of the Israelites until we have brought them to their place. Meanwhile, our women and children will live in fortified cities for protection from the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until each of the Israelites has received their inheritance. We will not receive any inheritance with them on the other side of the Jordan, because our inheritance has come to us on the east side of the Jordan. Then Moses said to them, if you will do this, if you will arm yourselves before the Lord for battle, and if all of you who are armed cross over the Jordan before the Lord until he has driven his enemies out before him, then when the land is subdued before the Lord, you may return and be free from your obligation to the Lord and to Israel, and this land will be your possession before the Lord. But if you fail to do this, you will be sinning against the Lord, and you may be sure that your sin will find you out. Build cities for your women and children and pens for your flocks, but do what you have promised." The Gadites, and Reubenites said to Moses, "We, your servants, will do as our Lord commands. Our children and wives, our flocks and herds will remain here in the cities of Gilead, but your servants, every man who is armed for battle, will cross over to fight before the Lord, just as our Lord says." So they come back and say, "Well, we'll go and fight with you, but we want our families and our flocks to stay on the east side of the Jordan. So our warriors will go, and our home bodies will stay home." But not just that the warriors will go; they are claiming to say, "We will go first. We will lead the vanguard in our attacks against our enemies," and this is pleasing to Moses. And they also say, "We want this to be our inheritance. All the other tribes can take the inheritance from the land. We don't want to take anything from them, and we're not going to take any plunder from those different towns as they go and conquer place by place." And they are making this promise to Moses and to the Lord. And so earlier we talked about vows, and here we are in a place where they are making a vow of a sort, saying, we want to do this, stay here, and we're going to make a vow that we will go with you on the other side and fight with you. And so this is acceptable to Moses. But then Moses, in verse 28, then Moses gave orders about them to Eleazar the priest and Joshua son of Nun, and to the family of the Israelite tribes. He said to them, "If the Gadites and Reubenites, every man armed for battle, cross over the Jordan with you before the Lord, then when the land is subdued before you, you must give them the land of Gilead as their possession. But if they do not cross over with you armed, they must accept their possession with you in Canaan." Now, why is Moses? There's a shift in tone here in what Moses is saying. If you do recognize it, not if they will go with us. Moses is saying if they go with you, because Moses knows that he's not going into the land either. So he's talking to it started with just the leaders from Gad and Reuben, and now Moses is taking it to the nation and the leaders of the nation, saying, "Look, they're promising to go with you." And the Gadites and Reubenites answered, "Your servants will do what the Lord has said. We will cross over before the Lord into Canaan armed, but the property we inherit will be on this side of the Jordan." Then Moses gave to the Gadites, the Reubenites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, the whole land with its cities and territory around them. The Gadites built upon Dibon, Aratoth, Aratoth, Shopon, Jatzer, Jogbaha, Bet Nimrah, and Bet Haran as fortified cities, and built pens for their flocks. And the Reubenites rebuilt Heshbon, Elealeh, and Kiriath-Taim, as well as Nebo and Baal Meon. Those names were changed, and Sibmah. They gave the names to the cities they rebuilt. The descendants of Machir, son of Manasseh, went to Gilead, captured it, and drove out the Amorites who were there. So Moses gave Gilead to the Machirites, the descendants of Manasseh, and they settled there. Jair, the descendant of Manasseh, captured their settlements and called them Havoth Jair. And Nobah captured Kenath and its surrounding settlements and called it Nobah after himself. So this agreement is struck between the different tribes, and then the people of Gad and Reuben and the half of the tribe of Manasseh, they get to work in conquering the rest of the cities that need to be conquered to be able to move in and protect their family as they go to their warriors go to battle in Canaan. And so there's a bit of process here that's happening that they're working through. And so one of the challenges here with the history or the future that we're going to see for the people of Israel, there will be drifting between the tribes. and the tribes on the east side of the Jordan will drift away, and they're actually going to be concerned that the people on the west side of Jordan will forget that they are also Israel. And so they build a little monument to remind the people, like, hey, we're with you. And so that's going to be a part of the process. And when the people from the west side of the Jordan see the monument on the east side, they're gonna be like, who do you think you are? And so there is a conflict that happens. But they come back and they say, we're with you. We're not trying to be anything other than with you. But continue through the narrative of scripture, and we see that these tribes on the east side of the Jordan are the first to fall away into idolatry. They're the first to fall away and to be taken in the captivity because they are on their own. They don't have the natural defense of the Jordan River and the mountains on the north and south of the Jordan that would have protected people. They're at risk. And they chose this risk because they saw the immediate gratification and satisfaction in the land that they were in. And then as I was preparing for this, I was listening to a couple different teachers walking through these passages, and both of them, you read through these passages and you're like, how does this apply to Christians today? And one of the things is, like, people would rather have the quick thing now than the hard thing they have to work for. And when it comes to our own faith, there are times where people would rather just stop where they feel comfortable than to continue to press in to the things of God that would challenge us, that would stretch us, that would bring us farther into greater levels of faith, greater levels of relationship with the Lord. But too often people hold back and stop. And so while it's not a perfect parallel here between these three portions of the tribes and our Christian faith, there's a principle that we can hold on to say, what, if God's calling us to something, the better thing is to pursue what he's called us to than to stop short and say, this is enough. Because there's always more that God wants to bless his people with. The inheritance of the Lord is good, and we should do what we can to put ourselves in a place to receive that inheritance. So that is Numbers 30 through 32, and we'll finish up Numbers next week, 33, 34, 35, 36. We'll finish that up, and then we'll be in Deuteronomy, which will be a long speech from Moses to the people. And I love Deuteronomy. It's full of reviewing the Lord's history with the people, the law. It's good. So, any questions on these three chapters that we read tonight? Any questions? No questions? All right. Well, y'all, I'm glad you were able to join us. When we were getting started, it was just me and Jeff, and it was one of those things where it's like, all right, Jeff, you're going to hear me talk about numbers. It's going to be fun. So I'm glad a few other folks were able to jump in. And so, yeah, but if there aren't any questions, then I got ready
one.
Okay.
Oh, well, a few of them, but these cities that they talk about, are they still there? Are they named the same?
Some of these cities may have been discovered. One of the busiest archaeological realms or zones is the Middle East, around Israel. And a large part is because people are curious about if the narrative of scripture is historically accurate. So people are looking for these places, and some of them have been found, but they're not like most of these have been like burned down through conquest or at different points throughout history. And so what they find is usually is usually the foundation of the wall, or they'll find a building that has a bunch of like broken pottery and some fragments of different documents and that kind of stuff. When I was in college, one of the most interesting classes I took was biblical archaeology. And we read this book, The Stones Cry Out by Randall Price. And so if that is something that you are interested in, learning more about the archaeology of the ancient Near East and the land of Israel, this is one of those resources that has a lot of just interesting things. So like, let me show you a picture. Like this is usually what they find, this kind of stuff, which we look at it and we're like, that's a bunch of garbage.
Mhm.
But for an archaeologist, it's like, look at how awesome this garbage is. This garbage is telling us something. And so this was the piles of clay tablets which once comprised the royal archives of Eblaite Empire. And I'm not entirely sure where Ebla was, but it is part of the Syrian Empire. I found it. So, yeah, so there's different things that they have found. And yeah, this is a great, I don't know if this book is still in print, but The Stones Cry Out is a good resource. Also, if you really want to get into the weeds on the ancient Near East, this book, A History of Israel by John Bright. This is, I think there's a 5th or 6th edition now. This is the 4th edition. This talks about a lot of the nations around Israel. So it's not just about Israel, but a lot of the nations around Israel during the time of the Exodus. So yeah. And also this is a much more conservative writer. John Bright is less so, just as a heads up. Just if you're reading that, it's like Jason recommended this guy who doesn't really believe Israel is Israel. I did not recommend a guy who doesn't believe Israel is Israel. I am saying John Bright wrote a lot of stuff about the time of ancient Israel. So yeah. So I mean, it's out there. People are finding it. Jericho, they found Jericho, and there's a lot of mystery around the different layers of Jericho, because it is clearly built in stages. And so what's that about? Yeah, so interesting stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, any other thoughts, questions?
Look at my notes. No?
No? All right. Well, yeah.
Names that they use. I mean, do these names that they have in the Bible, do they still use those kind of names in their language and stuff today?
In Hebrew?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, their names they sound weird to us because we don't speak Hebrew, but they are still, all these names have a meaning. And so I can't say off the top of my head what all these different names mean, but they're tied to some kind of thing. And so they're not uncommon names. But like even in this last section, there's some names that are of these cities that are, it says in verse 38, these names were changed because those names of those two towns, Nebo and Baal Me'on, they were tied to idols, false gods. And so the people of Israel went in and said, we're not going to call this city that anymore. We're going to give it a new name because we don't want to be associated with these different idols. But yeah, these kinds of names are still around in Middle East. But a lot of the names in the place names have changed a lot over the different years because so many different empires have walked over that land. So there's going to be Canaanite names, Hebrew names, Greek names, Arabic names, all kinds of different things. So yeah, it's not an easy path to be able to say, well, that is definitely that town, because it's changed names many times throughout history. So yeah. All right.
I'm still baffled. I'm not baffled, but mind boggled. Before he calls him to battle, and remember before a couple weeks ago, I was like, calls them to battle and they don't know battle. So how did they learn? Miraculously, did they all just wake up and know how to battle?
Well, they have been in they've spent 40 years now in the wilderness. And so they have probably developed a military by this point.
Yeah.
And so they probably, have some training that they have developed. So, but the miracle is in this particular passage is 12,000 men went out and 12,000 men came home.
Mhm.
So clearly the Lord is with them and is protecting them. But it is definitely unusual to have that effect ever. Like I've never heard of a battle of like this, an ancient battle like this, that there were no casualties on one side. So the Lord is doing many miracles among them.
It just seems like with every time he asks them to do something, it's totally blind faith. I mean, the whole walking through, the walking through the Jordan, walking through the parting of the Red Sea on dry land. They had to keep on going and doing it. Same with this. They had when they were called to battle, they just had to ante up and go do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And for the Red Sea generation, that was a huge step of faith, but that generation died in the wilderness. And so the next generation, their step of faith is walking into the Jordan River. And when we get to Joshua, and we'll see like the priests go first with the ark. They're carrying the ark. They walk into the river and the river stops. It piles up behind them. It's pretty amazing. So, but God has taken care of them all along the way. So when we get into Deuteronomy, God is going to remind the people, like, you lived in the wilderness for 40 years and your shoes never wore out and you never went hungry. I've been taking care of you. Trust me, I will continue to take care of you. So, yeah.
See the parallel here, how you were talking about how some people stagnate in their faith and then you never move forward. Same thing with this, with Israelites. They couldn't stagnate, otherwise it was death for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they had to keep doing the next right thing that the Lord was calling them to do. But which is not easy.
No, I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah. Faith is trusting that Jesus has accomplished everything we need. It is easy to agree with. The faith is living it out, letting him change and transform us. And that's the hard part. But it's the Spirit of God working in us that helps us to do that. So when we feel like we don't have the faith to keep going, that's when we need to pray even harder. Lord, I need you today. So.
Could you repeat that? A phone call came in just as you were talking.
Oh, when we are following Jesus, the faith that when we feel like we can't do it on our own strength, that's when we need to pray and ask the Spirit of God to give us the strength we need day to day.
Amen. Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why the Lord's Prayer, Jesus says, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread." It's a reminder all the way back to the time in the wilderness where the Lord provided daily bread for them. It's like, I need that still. I know I don't need like a slice of bread from heaven every day. I need that strength, that supply, the sustenance of the Spirit every day. So, yeah.
Such parallel.
Yep. All right. Well, everyone, thank you for jumping in, and we'll be back next week. We're almost done with Numbers, which when you look at the title, it's like, man, that's going to be a boring book. It was not. I love Numbers, so it's got a lot of exciting stuff in there. So, but all right. Well, I will see you all next. Some of you Sunday, and everyone.
I'll be there.
Oh, I'll be there too, Jeff.
I'll be walking around the campus with Pastor Byron praying for the services.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you.
Right.
We'll be gone, Jason. We're going to be gone for a week.
Okay. We will miss you.
I am
Seemed
going to
like you,
my family to bring
That's
me
right.
there for the first time.
yeah,
Okay.
we just
Well,
need,
y'all,
oh, go ahead.
I was
Oh,
just gonna
yeah,
say,
sorry.
y'all have a good night. So,
We will,
okay.
we will.
Thank you.